The first thing they noticed was the smell. Not sweat or fear or coal smoke, but the sharp, lemony sting of disinfectant. The quiet, clean promise of a hospital corridor. It cut through the train soot that clung to their uniforms and settled into the folds of their doubt. Sister Elise Mertens stood at the top of the steps, blinking into the hard Mississippi daylight, and tried to reconcile two impossible ideas at once. Barbed wire glittered on the fence line, and yet a Red Cross flag lifted in the breeze like a welcome banner. "Single file, ladies," an American voice called. "No bark, no shove, just steady instruction. Watch your step." The decking's slick. Elise braced for the humiliation she'd been taught to expect. Boots against shins, hands against backs, the sneer that always came before a blow. Instead, a sergeant with sunburnt cheeks and careful German held out his palm. "Sergeant Miller," he said, "Camp Clinton. There's a quarantine check first, then meals. Then, if you're willing, work assignments in the hospital." Hospital. The word snagged in Elise's mind like thread on a nail. Behind her, Sister Lotta whispered, "Did he say work?" Elise didn't answer. She couldn't. The last hospital she had seen, if you could call it that, had been a cellar with a bucket and a stump. Pain had been a smell and a sound and a color there, and it had taught her a bleak arithmetic. Morphine minus, blood plus, time equals loss. They moved. 12 of them, captured German Red Cross nurses from field stations that had been swallowed by spring offensives, walked between two lines of American MPs who carried rifles as if they were tools rather than threats. Beyond the gate, the world shifted one notch further from the propaganda they had swallowed whole. The parade ground was raked. The buildings were not sheds but proper barracks, painted and squared. Somewhere to the left a whistle blew, orderly, not panicked, and from the right drifted the sound that made Lotta press her fist to her mouth, laughter. Inside the processing hut, an American captain sat behind a desk piled with forms. A woman, Elise realized with a jolt. Crisp khaki, perfect braid, eyes that took in everything, missed nothing. "I'm Captain Mary Rodriguez," the officer said in German that carried the lightest trace of Texas. "Welcome to Camp Clinton. We'll verify identities and check health status. Then we'll discuss temporary assignments. If you have medical experience." Her gaze moved from their shoulder patches to their chests, where Red Cross pins still clung. "We can use your help. Use your help. Not wring you dry. Not punish." Elise tried the phrase in her mouth and found it tasted like disbelief. They fingerprinted and numbered them, yes. They took their names and ranks and captured dates. But the room smelled of paper and coffee, not fear. When Elise's turn came, Captain Rodriguez passed across a printed sheet. "Your rights under the Geneva Convention," she said, in German. Elise read the first line because she needed to anchor herself to something indisputable. "Prisoners of war shall at all times be humanely treated." The words sat on the page with an almost comical dignity, like a judge in a plowed field. She read them again. "Humanely treated? Any injuries?" the captain asked. Elise stripped her glove and showed the angry healing line that ran from the base of her thumb to the meat of her palm. "Field incision," she said. "Wine cork screw, boiled." The captain didn't flinch. "We'll get that seen in the clinic." She lifted a brow. "You're a surgical nurse?" "Ward and theater. Anesthesia if needed. A soft sound. Approval, not suspicion. Then you'll want to meet Dr. Green." The clinic stood near the center of camp. One long, low building with a veranda shaded by screens. An American flag stirred above the entrance, and beside it, the Red Cross leaned into the same wind. Inside, white. White tiles like a promise. White coats. White enamel basins. Noise, but not chaos. Only the quiet hive of work being done on purpose. "Ma'am," said a corpsman at the door. "Sanitation first." He gestured toward a wash station where steam curled up from a line of metal sinks like a benediction. Soap. Clean towels. Brushes to scrub in. Something in Elise cracked at the sight of hot water. Not a sob, she would not allow that, but a small disloyal looseness around the heart, as if a fist had been unclenched without her consent. Water had meant rationing and bribes and lies for months. Here it ran and ran and ran. "Gloves your size," the corpsman said, consulting her hands the way a tailor did. Clinical, not intimate. He found a box of 612, passed them over. "You'll meet Dr. Green in triage." Triage was not a ward. It was a map of priorities. American privates with sprains from drills. A German prisoner with a fresh laceration across the temple. Sutures clean and neat, the needle already threaded. A kitchen worker with a burn wrapped in gauze that had been changed, not neglected. There was a rhythm to it, a forward motion that did not push or punish, but simply cared. Dr. Green was younger than Elise expected. Mid-30s, perhaps, with a face that had learned to set itself into a serious kindness, because anything else would fracture under the strain. He looked up when Captain Rodriguez led them in. "Doctor," the captain said. "German medical personnel. Experienced." Green nodded once. "Businesslike. Ladies, if you're willing, we can pair you with American nurses today. Observational at first, hands-on by tomorrow. Geneva allows employment commensurate with rank and skill, with pay and canteen tokens." "Consent only." "Consent only," Elise echoed, and something complicated happened in her chest again. She looked at Lotte, whose mouth had gone tight with pride and fear. "We'll observe," she said, "and if your procedures are sound, we'll work." Green pointed toward a bay where a young corporal lay on a stretcher with his ankle elevated, sweat shining on his upper lip. "Sister Mertens, translate while Lieutenant Parker prepares a block." Elise crossed to the cot. The corporal was trying to be brave the way the very young always tried, by being louder than the pain. She spoke to him in German out of habit, then corrected herself. "English," she said, and switched. "They will numb your leg. No cutting. You will feel pressure, not pain." She watched his eyes, which were flicking between her face and the light above him. "Breathe." Lieutenant Parker, American nurse, exact movements, half smile that was all competence and no flirtation, nodded thanks. "Appreciate it," she murmured. "Doc likes to test us fast." "Don't we all?" Elise said before she could stop herself. Parker's brow quirked, surprised into something like friendship. For 30 minutes, Elise watched, learned, measured. Instruments boiled, counted, laid out with a ceremonial care that turned metal into reassurance. Labels on shelves that spoke a language she could read. Morphine, sulfa, antiseptic powder, sutures by gauge. The work was not new to her. In many ways it was painfully familiar. But none of it carried the chaotic stink of desperation that had haunted her last months in the field. At noon, a bell rang that might have been a school chime in another life. "Mess," someone said. 15 minutes. They filed into a dining hall that shouldn't have belonged inside any fence. Long tables, tin trays, a line of cooks, one with a face like a canyon and a smile like a bridge, ladled stew that smelled like thyme and patient heat. "Eat," he told them in thick German. "Plenty." Elise accepted bread with the faint suspicion of a stray dog, then sat. The first spoonful undid her more cruelly than the hot water had, because taste was memory, and memory was home. Potatoes that remembered dirt, beef that remembered having been muscle, salt that remembered the sea. Lotte was already crying quietly, the chastened kind. Tears you hid from hard men in uniforms because they would call them weakness. No one mocked her here. An American private slid a napkin across the table, and the gesture was so absurdly gentle that Elise wanted to stand up and slam her tray to the floor, just to stir up the cruelty she had been promised and could not find. After lunch, Captain Rodriguez caught them at the door. "Orientation," she said, as if that were the most ordinary word in the world. "Work options, recreation, correspondence, medical staff, with me." They sat in a small classroom where a blackboard wore neat English words like a new suit: schedule, sanitation, chain of command. Rodriguez outlined rules that were not traps, but rails. Things meant to keep a train on the track, not send it into a ditch. She spoke of Red Cross inspections as if they were tests she enjoyed taking. "If you accept hospital work," she finished, "you'll be paired and supervised. If you choose not to, you'll still receive all protections. Questions?" A hand rose from the back. Sister Hilda, sharp as an icicle. "What do you want from us?" The captain didn't pretend not to understand. "For you to be safe, for our patients to be safe, for the war to end with as few broken people as possible. And in exchange?" Hilda pressed. Rodriguez's mouth softened. "In exchange, we get to live with ourselves." That afternoon, Elise stood at a sink with Lieutenant Parker and scrubbed. Brushes over knuckles, over wrists, up to the elbows. The familiar sting of antiseptic. The familiar ritual of transforming hands from instruments of survival into tools of healing. "Tell me," Parker said over the hiss of water, "how you ran your wards." "You don't want to know," Elise said, and meant it kindly. "Not because I am ashamed of the work, but because you will not sleep for 3 nights if I tell you the truth." Parker rinsed, turned off the tap with the back of her wrist. "Then tell me what you refuse to surrender." Elise looked at her hands, at the red-lined soap raised where gloves would soon press. "Order," she said, "respect for the patient. The belief that if you treat pain like an emergency and dignity like a right, sometimes men live who would otherwise die." Parker nodded once. "You'll do." They began with something simple, because trust grew best in places where blood did not shout. A kitchen worker with a forearm burn. The American method was almost luxurious in its attention. Cool water to draw heat, sterile gauze to dry, an ointment that smelled faintly medicinal and deeply merciful. Elise's fingers knew the dance almost without being told. The patient looked at her, not as a guard looked at a prisoner, or a victor at the defeated, but as one human looked at another who might ease his day. "Danke," he said, barbarized, shy. "Thank you, Gern," Elise murmured. "With pleasure." The next day, Green put her on a surgical rotation as an observer. "We take our time choosing who handles steel," he said. "But I can see you counting instruments in your head already." She was. She always would be. It kept people alive. The case was an abscess under the arm of a German prisoner who refused to look anyone in the eye. Odor, yes, because bodies were bodies, but no filth, no flies. The tray glittered with forceps, scalpels, sutures. Green's voice was steady, the way Elise had always asked surgeons to keep it when they worked in rooms full of fear. "We go in here, we drain, we irrigate, we pack, we watch." Elise found herself nodding in time. The anesthetic took, and the prisoner's breath softened. Green made the smallest incision possible because mercy in medicine was often measured in centimeters. The pus came and it was ugly. And Elise did not flinch because she had long ago learned that disgust was a luxury that belonged to bystanders. The irrigation ran clear. The wound was packed. The patient slept. The room exhaled. Parker passed Elise the chart without ceremony. "Want to write the notes?" Elise raised an eyebrow. "Your English is better than mine on 3 hours sleep," Parker said. "And your penmanship looks like a cathedral," Elise wrote, and though the words were American, the bones of them were hers. Procedure, observations, plan, care. The neatness of it steadied her in a way she had not expected. "This is how the world is repaired," she thought. Not with speeches, not with parades, but with ink and gauze and hands that refused to be cruel. At evening recreation, what a strange phrase to place inside wire, they passed a building whose windows showed shelves, not bunks. A library. Books with spines that had not been chewed by damp. German language volumes on one table, English primers on another. A sign on the wall. Classes, English, arithmetic, bookkeeping, mechanics. Another sign, Red Cross visit, Tuesday. "Do you think the inspections are theater?" Hilda asked under her breath. Elise wanted to say yes because it would make her feel clever and in control. "No," she said instead, because honesty was a muscle she wanted to rebuild. "It's too thorough to be theater. It's habit. That's worse for us. Worse? Because habits shape souls." That night, Captain Rodriguez visited the nurses' barracks with a folder tucked under her arm. "Opportunities," she said, and laid out sheets. Translators for administrative forms. Teaching assistant needed for German language literacy class. Hospital shift schedulers. Sanitation inspectors, Lotta repeated, faintly amused. "You want prisoners to check your latrines?" Rodriguez smiled. "We want the truth written down by the people who would most enjoy finding fault. Makes for good reports." "Reports for whom?" Hilda asked. "For me," Rodriguez said cheerfully. "And for the Red Cross, and for our own records when the war is over, and men who never scrubbed a day in their lives stand in rooms like this and demand to know whether we kept our standards high when keeping them was hard." Elise sifted the papers until her fingers stopped on a schedule grid, the kind she had drawn 100 times by candle stub and broken pencil. "I can do this," she heard herself say. "Track shifts, balance skills, pair the impatient with the meticulous so neither kills a patient or a friendship." Parker, leaning in the doorway, snorted. "We call that nursing." On the third morning, Elise washed at the hot tap and felt, with a shame that was not shameful at all, the simple happiness of warmth. She pulled on a clean dress that had been laundered, not merely beaten in river stones. She tied her hair back with a ribbon Lotta had scavenged from a Red Cross mending kit. In the mirror, real glass, not tin, she looked like a woman who might belong to a future. The ward earned that future in centimeters again. A German prisoner with a fever that broke under wet cloths and sulfa. An American private whose stitches itched and who grinned apologetically while Elise scolded him in 2 languages for scratching. A kitchen spill. A stubbed toe. A boil lanced with minimal drama and maximum relief. Green called her aside before lunch. "You've been offered a post," he said without preliminaries. "Shift coordinator. We pay in tokens. You send schedules to me. You write your own notes. You tell Parker when she's overworking herself and she rolls her eyes and does what you say anyway." Elise laughed despite herself. "What's the trap?" "No trap," he said. "Only the work." He paused, and his voice gentled without getting softer. "There's one condition." "Ah," Elise said. "Here it comes. You don't spy for us. You don't spy for them. You spy for the patients. It was ridiculous how quickly her throat closed around the idea. She looked at his face, and in it found not a salesman peddling a bargain, but a man who had gone to bed too many nights tallying losses he did not want to carry anymore. "Done," she said, "on one condition of my own." Green tilted his head. "When we fail," she said, "we write it down. No erasing. If we run out of gloves, it goes in the log. If a dressing is late, it goes in the log. If a German nurse loses her temper and calls an American sergeant a mule, it goes in the log." "That last one seems awfully specific," Parker said from the doorway. Elise did not blush. "Hypothetical," she said primly. "Deal," Green said, and shook her hand as if she were an equal. In the afternoon, the Red Cross woman walked the ward with a clipboard and questions that pried under bandages that were not on bodies. Protocols, rotations, complaint procedures. She spoke to patients in English, then German, then the universal language of pointing at charts and raising eyebrows. Elise translated where needed. The answers did not require varnish. Yes, they had enough dressings. Yes, prisoners received medical care at the same standard as American personnel. Yes, errors were documented and corrected. No, punishment was not meted out through a withdrawal of care. "Your handwriting is excellent," the inspector said at last. "Did you train under a matron with a ruler?" "2," Elise said, "and 1 through the ruler." "Good," the inspector said. "I dislike rulers." Outside, dusk leaked across the yard in pale bands. The wire glittered. The flag dropped. Someone strummed a guitar near the mess. The smell of coffee lifted like a small miracle. Lotta sat on the barracks steps and massaged her wrists, the pink dents where gloves had held on like promises. "I'm forgetting to be afraid," she said, and the confession shook them both. Elise looked toward the clinic where a lantern burned in the window. Not a warning, but an invitation. "Come if you need us." She thought of the cellar hospital and the bucket and the stump and the arithmetic that had measured men into graves. She thought of Captain Rodriguez laying out rights like cutlery properly placed. She thought of Parker's hands, steady over boiling water, and Green's quiet insistence that consent was not a fancy word, but a floor. "You're not forgetting," Elise said at last. "You're remembering." "Remembering what?" "That this is how it's supposed to be." They sat together in the almost dark, and for the first time since surrender had rewritten their lives, they did not rush to fill the silence with hard talk. Somewhere a kitchen door slammed. Somewhere a man laughed at a joke that would not survive translation. Somewhere a patient rolled and did not wake because pain had been asked to leave him alone for the night. A bell rang. Not an alarm, a call. "Education hour," a voice shouted down the lane. "English class," Lotta groaned. "I can count sutures in my sleep, but verbs—" "Will keep us honest," Elise said, and stood. Across the yard, the library windows shone like a ship. Inside, on a table under lamplight, lay 2 stacks of books, Beginner's English and Deutsche Grammatik. Between them, a space had been left as if for a handshake. Elise crossed the threshold and took a seat at the edge of the table, hands still smelling faintly of antiseptic, mind humming with new logistics she wanted to sketch on the back of a schedule grid. The teacher, a woman with chalk dust on her sleeve and the authority of someone who had taught children to sound out hope during a depression, smiled. "Welcome," she said. "Tonight, we practice 2 phrases." She wrote them on the board in a hand that made the letters stand up straight. "How can I help?" "Thank you for your help." Elise felt the strangest sensation then, as if the ground had shifted half an inch toward level. The phrases were not instruments of surrender. They were tools that built bridges plank by plank across an old loud river. After class, the camp settled. Lights out blinked across the barracks like a tide. Elise lay awake 1 minute longer than she needed to, listening, cataloging, the way she always did. Boots but not hurried, voices but not raised. A cough answered, the distant clink of a basin set to dry, the small, soft hush of a page turned in a book, because someone could not yet bear to put a story down. She closed her eyes and measured a different arithmetic finally. Order plus respect plus time equals repair. Tomorrow she would post the new shifts, and someone would complain, and she would smile, and Parker would smuggle her a cup of coffee so strong it remembered the plantation. Dr. Green would throw her a problem on purpose to see how she solved it. The Red Cross woman would come back and count something Elise had already counted. Sergeant Miller would say "Guten Morgen" with an accent that made Lotta hoot. And somewhere in the middle of it a German prisoner with a wound that had frightened him would say "Danke," the way a child says grace. Tentative, grateful, astonished that he still had words. Outside, the flag rested. The wire drew its neat line against the sky and did not bite. and the hospital, white, bright, absurd in its mercy, waited for morning. Morning came the way forgiveness sometimes does, quietly through ordinary light. Steam rose from the field beyond the clinic, carrying the scent of wet cotton and boiled linens. Elise tightened her apron, glanced over the shift chart tacked to the wall, and noticed something unusual written in Dr. Green's neat block letters. Joint Operation, 0900, German plus American staff. A ripple of unease moved through the ward. For weeks, the German nurses had shadowed procedures, passed instruments, changed dressings. But surgery, real teamwork under a single light, was different. Trust there was no metaphor. It had to be literal, built in flesh and thread. Captain Rodriguez entered, clipboard in hand. Red Cross observers arrive at noon, she said. Dr. Green wants to demonstrate integrated staff protocol. Her gaze softened when it landed on Elise. He asked for you specifically. Lotta's eyes went wide. You'll stand beside an American surgeon? Elise felt the old battlefield tremor in her fingers. The memory of sawing through chaos with no anesthesia. Beside, yes, she said quietly. Not against. The operation. The operating room hummed with sterilizers and nerves. An American orderly set the tray. A German nurse checked the count. The patient, a U.S. engineer wounded while repairing the camp's generator, lay pale under the ether mask. Dr. Green adjusted the lamp. Sister Mertens, you'll assist Lieutenant Parker on suction. Step in when needed. He didn't look at her again, and that was the greatest compliment possible. He trusted her not to need permission. The first incision drew a collective breath from everyone. It wasn't blood that unsettled Elise. It was what followed, the automatic choreography. Hands moving without nationality. Pressure applied. Gauze offered. Clamp clicked. For 1 hour, the war ceased to exist between steel instruments. Halfway through, Parker whispered, "He's dropping pressure." Elise's voice answered before thought. "Adrenaline ampule, there, second tray." Green reached, injected, stabilized, a nod. No good work, no applause, just continued focus, the kind that meant life. When the wound was closed and the patient breathing evenly, Green stripped his gloves and exhaled. "Ladies, note for the log. Procedure successful. 0 complications." He turned to Elise. "Your quick call kept him above threshold." "Thank you." It should have been a small moment, another entry in a report. Instead, it rewired something old and rigid inside her. The part that believed acknowledgement was currency reserved for victors. Parker grinned, sweat shining on her temple. "Guess that makes us colleagues." "Guess it does," Elise said. And the word colleague felt stranger and more sacred than freedom had ever sounded. The inspection at noon. The Red Cross convoy rolled through the gates. White jeeps, red emblems, notebooks ready. Dr. Warren, tall and silver-haired, shook each nurse's hand before beginning rounds. "We'll speak with both American and German staff," she said. "Same questions, same expectations." In the ward, she stopped beside a recovering prisoner whose chest rose steadily under clean sheets. "How are you treated?" she asked in German. The man blinked. "Better than I deserve," Elise translated softly. Warren wrote the words verbatim. In the mess hall, the inspectors noted calorie counts and portion sizes. In the recreation hut, they watched Germans and Americans play chess at opposite ends of one long table. No speeches, no cameras, just the quiet work of verification. That evening, Captain Rodriguez gathered the staff. "Dr. Warren's report," she read, "finds Camp Clinton compliant in all categories and exemplary in medical care and education." Then she looked up. "They're forwarding it to Washington and Geneva." A wave of subdued pride swept the room. Unpatriotic for one side, unmilitary for the other, entirely human for both. Green folded his arms. "Enjoy the praise tonight. Tomorrow we keep earning it." Letters and lessons night brought storms. Thunder rolled like distant artillery. Too distant to hurt, close enough to remember. By lantern light, Elise wrote to her mother in Hamburg. "They treat us not as enemies, but as students of decency. I spend my days cleaning wounds, my evenings teaching English to men who once bombed our ports. I can no longer tell where duty ends and gratitude begins." She hesitated, then added a final line that trembled even on paper. "If the world rebuilds, let it be with soap and books before steel." Outside, Lotta practiced English pronunciation under her breath. "Please. Thank you. Good morning." Each word sounded like a brick laid towards something steadier than peace treaties. The classroom weeks later, the education hall buzzed like a school before finals. The German nurses now taught first aid basics to incoming POWs. Bandaging, fever management, hygiene. On the blackboard, Elise had written in both languages, "Heal to live." Captain Rodriguez observed from the back, her expression halfway between pride and relief. When the class ended, she pulled Elise aside. "You're rebuilding medicine and language at the same time. That's diplomacy in disguise," Elise smiled faintly. "We're just washing our hands a lot." "That's where diplomacy starts," Rodriguez said. That night, the camp projector flickered to life for another film. But this time, it wasn't the propaganda reels of liberation atrocities. It was education footage from the new Allied nursing program in Europe. Men and women from former enemy nations learning together under the same lamp. When the lights came up, Parker whispered, "Think you'll teach there someday?" Elise watched the image of hands passing instruments across national lines frozen on the last frame. "If they'll have me," she said. The end of captivity, May 1946. Word came that repatriation ships were ready. The nurses packed their few possessions, notebooks, tokens, photographs, and the small certificates of training signed by American officers. Dr. Green found Elise in the ward, tightening bandages one last time. "You'll be on the second convoy," he said. "Before you go, know this. None of what we built here works without people like you. I only did my duty." He shook his head. "You redefined it." When the convoy left Camp Clinton, the nurses stood in open trucks, faces turned toward a horizon both strange and merciful. American guards saluted. No jeers, no gloating, just quiet respect. Lauda waved until her arm ached. Elise simply memorized the flag one last time, not as a symbol of victory, but of restraint. Epilogue Bremen, months later. The city still smelled of smoke and rebuilding. Elise worked at a provisional hospital funded partly by the Red Cross. The equipment came from America. Bandages stamped U.S. medical supply. One morning she unfolded a crate manifest and froze at a signature on the bottom. Lieutenant Parker H., Camp Clinton transfer. Inside the crate lay a note wrapped around a new stethoscope. To Sister Mertens. "For the hands that reminded us why we fight to save, not to destroy. Parker." Elise held the instrument to her chest and felt the pulse beneath. The same rhythm she had heard in every ward where mercy outlasted ideology. At dusk, she pinned her faded Red Cross badge beside the American stethoscope on her uniform. Outside, children played amid rubble that already smelled faintly of spring. She called to them in German, then corrected herself in English. Both sounded right. In a letter to Captain Rodriguez she would never send, she wrote, "You taught me that civilization begins where cruelty is inconvenient. We learn to keep the lamps burning even when the power is gone. If the future has nurses on both sides of a wound, it may yet heal." She set down her pen, listening to the steady human music of a recovering ward. Breath, footsteps, whispered thanks. The war had ended months ago, but its truest victory was still unfolding here, heartbeat by heartbeat, beneath the smell of disinfectant and hope.